All right. So if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to drop them in the chat box, but we're going to get started. So allow me to introduce our guest tonight. So let's start it with Rosa Iris Diendome Alvarez. She's an international human rights lawyer and a community activist of Asian descent. She, Asian father and Dominican mother. She's a founding member of Movimiento Reconocido and was a candidate for Congress in 2016 for the second precinct of San Pedro de Macorís. Rosa is the main protagonist of the documentary, as you just saw. And our next guest is Michèle Stephenson, who is a filmmaker and a former human rights attorney. She is known for her commitment to making personal human stories that are often excluded from mainstream media. Her Panamanian and Haitian heritage has also fueled her passion to tackle stories on communities of color and human rights. Her work has appeared on PBS, Showtime, and MTV, and other outlets. So welcome, ladies, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
All right. So starting off with Rosa Iris. First question, one may think that looking at your upbringing in Bate Chicharrones, you're looking at it, we could say that you beat the odds. Would you agree with that statement? And the second part of that is, what made you decide to pursue a career in law? Okay. Flavia?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Buenas noches, muchísimas
Good
gracias.
evening. Thank you so much for being here today and for watching the documentary with us. It's such an excitement to be here with you all. Thank you for your question. Well, I think that yes, I have been in ways to be able to break those parameters, those limitations that are set out. More than anything, in a system that has so much lack of equality, so many inequalities, so few opportunities, right? For many families in the Batey to be able to finish the high school, it's a great challenge. Regardless of identification, it's the economical situation. Now, for my family, I am one of the first ones to be able to finish law school, to be able to go to the university. So yes, we were able to beat the odds in that way, that even up to this date, it's preserved for a certain class, those people who may be able to achieve certain economic possibilities. Now, to answer your second question, what made me study law? So I had to go work as a very young woman. I had to go to work so in order to be able to study. So when I came back to the Batey, a couple of years afterwards, it was so hard to see young women who are my age, who left high school. And many of them were not able to continue studying because of their identification issues. So there were economical situations, legal situations that people were not able to resolve because they were not able to pay a legal fee, because they were not able to pay a lawyer, pay honoraries. Now, it's a little bit odd, but I started studying medicine. I studied 4 years medicine, and then I was not able to continue. So then I go back to study law, and I realize this reality of the Batey. Now, what it made me make that decision is to go to the Batey, and then on the way, I found a man. He was 80 years old. He was working under the sun, and he had a condition. He was not able to urinate, and that impacted me so much. And I was saying, why does he have to work? No, he was telling me, if I don't work, I won't have a right to live at this home. I could not understand that a person who had been working for over 50 years, they still had to be working, put up through all of that, so that he would still be able to live in that house and have food. So how is it possible? After 50 years, he paid for taxes so that he could have, so that he could retire. So that's when I started helping elders to be able to get their insurances and different stuff. And it was a quite challenging challenge, because many of them die before receiving their retirement. So that's why I started. That's what moved me. I cannot stand still in front of injustices.
Wow, thank you for that. And you were involved in, well, you're still, I say you're still involved in community organizations. So it's been more than now 20 years.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wow, great. Thank you for all the work you do, on behalf of all those people. And let's shift it a little bit to Michèle. Michèle, you've worked as a human rights lawyer, and now you're a filmmaker. How did you get into film? And what particular things are you looking for when choosing a project?
Okay. Well, it was sort of serendipitous, my switch from law to film. They kind of almost happened sort of at the same time. When I started law school, I met my current partner and the co-founder of our production company, Rada Studio, and he was actually doing his own career shift, Joe Brewster. And I was about to start law school when I met him, and I was on set with him a few times with some of the short films and actually the feature film he was doing. I was helping him do it. And he encouraged me to take a camera on my first internship that I did with my when I was in law school, because I was interested always in doing public interest human rights law. That's why I went to law school. I took a camera. I had an internship in Sao Paulo, Brazil for a summer. And I took the camera with me for the first time. And I was also doing legislative work as an intern. And this organization, this Afro-Brazilian women's organization that was doing legal work by day. They were actually lobbying for certain legislation, the criminalization of hate, of acts of hate violence, racial hate. And by night and on weekends, they also had an outreach program with women who lived in the inner city, which is the periphery of Sao Paulo, who were doing music, specifically hip hop music. And these were feminist, Black feminist women doing hip hop. And I followed a couple of them. And so when I compared the work that I was doing with the camera, as young as I was and as new as it was, I felt a certain level of transformative work happening sort of more immediately through the building of narrative, both in terms of the exchanges I was having with these women, them in terms of the idea of validating their story and sharing their story, me in terms of also validating my own healing in terms of looking at identity and race and injustice, but also feeding a little bit of that artistic soul that has always been a part of me for many years, since as young as I can remember. And then I would by day still do sort of legal work that of course is important and transformative, but the passion that I felt was not the same. And so I knew when I came back, a short film came out of that did, a festival circuit, and I did end up finishing law school, and I did end up working still in law because, I'm also sort of a first generation college grad, and so important to have that financial sort of support before sort of leaping into certain things that I may not have had the initial training in, because I did not go to film school. Okay. And so always felt the need and the understanding that narrative change is important, and the work in culture is just as important as work in legislation. And somehow for me, it was feeding my soul. There was also sort of a healing process that was happening. And so gradually I was able to shift. I did more short films on my own. I got a job that was actually blending the two, working in documentary film and law with a program called Witness, where we were giving cameras to human rights activists around the world to document human rights violations. And then that became later, you know, a decision to take the full leap and start our company and do nonfiction film full time. And I've never really looked back. So it's, for me, the idea of this battle of narratives that we're in is really, really important and key. And in terms of looking, what I look for, you know, it's an organic process. The research and development phase is really important. You have to get to, in terms of if you're doing work like the Stateless film, which is heavily observational, you have to sort of connect with people in a way that's sort of authentic and organic. So there's a lot of time that you need to spend to build trust and create relationships and friendships that will allow you sort of to be able to tell a complicated story that's full, you know. And so, and then there's certain people you meet who you realize and you know that, you know, their story, their presence is going to speak to so many people that it's really important to build a connection and follow them. And this is what happened with Rosa Iris.
Yeah, and I'm curious to learn or to hear from either of you how you came in contact with each other.
Well, from my end, I had done some work around the earthquake back in 2010, the earthquake in Haiti, and had connected with a number of organizations that were based in the DR, but doing solidarity work. Some were led by Dominicans of Haitian descent, and others were Dominican youth working both not only to help support the rebuilding of Haiti, but also to work. There was solidarity work to sort of counter the stereotypes and the racism that existed. And so when the sentencia happened 3 years later in 2013, I reconnected with some of those folks on the ground. Okay. And they led me to the organization Reconocido, where I met a number of the leaders there. And they are the ones, again, who connected me to Rosa. And so I met Rosa in a legal office that was doing work in the Batey in San Pedro de Macorís, and followed her that first day into these different bateys to hear the stories of people who've been affected by the decision. But I think what is key in terms of finding, or, you know, finding people to essentially collaborate with, because essentially, you know, was back and forth working with Rosa for over 5 years, almost up to 2020. From 2014 we met, because I was end of 2014, 2015, I think we met, to now, you know, has been a building of a collaborative process. And so I lost my train. The thread I wanted to say is that the importance of building, you know, relationships that, you know, that can stand the test of time, sort of, and that can only sort of help the process and the product at the end, the film and the story that's told at the end.
Okay, thank you for that. So from your standpoint, Rosa Iris, what were some of the challenges? And after her, Michèle, you can also share with us the challenges. What were some of the challenges being the subject of such a documentary, if any?
Oh, bueno.
Okay, so there were many challenges. First, to be able to achieve that people trust, have people trust what's being done without creating false expectations, right? So first of all, like, for example, in front of a reality of people who have been waiting for decades for a solution because of a problem that's due to the state, and they don't find any solutions. Now, this is a challenge because let's say other Dominicans that are not from Haitian descent, they can access to their rights, whatever services they want. And the Dominican of Haitian descent, in order to be able to advance in their process, and sometimes they don't even have a definite solution, they need to be with somebody else, that generates insecurity, lack of trust. Some people were afraid of being filmed. Others, they didn't have any issues, but some of them had reservations, and that they were like, that's going to create me trouble afterwards. Or maybe, let's say, if there was a Dominican person that was not affected, he would get worried. He would be like, what if I come out on the news and then I lose my job? That was difficult. Nonetheless, when I hear that word you said, challenges, it goes farther out from the film, the documentary. What challenges did we have as affected communities? So I want to mention many of them. For example, a big challenge for us has been that people are able to continue believing that it was worth to get organized, to be able to achieve that impact that the movement Reconocido produced. First, what we had to do was get together, sit down, educate ourselves, and get organized about what our rights are. We cannot allow for other people to come out and demand what belongs to us. So that's what we did in the Batallas. We sat down with all the young people, and the Constitution says that on this, and that, you have different rights. So empower them. And then on every 12th of every month, we would come out and we would protest. Now, some people would call me crazy, because I remember that in some manifestations, we went from my city, San Pedro de Macorís, to the National Palace, walking, 3 days walking. People would pass out, some of them, their feet were bleeding, but we were able to get attention and put the pressure where it's supposed to be and say, this exists, this is a problem, we need to find a true solution, an effective solution. We cannot continue until in front of a reality that a person who's affected simply because they are of Haitian descent, that you need to be with somebody else that helps them. People need to be able to access their rights between being alongside another person, the same way that other Dominicans do who are not from Haitian descent. Now, another challenge, have the media not manipulate this issue of Dominicans of Haitian descent with immigration. Those are two different important issues, but their solutions come from different institutions. The pathways to solutions are different. So it was quite confusing whenever we would do protests and we would demand something, because the title would be Haitians Demand Rights, Haitians demand papers. And yes, they need their rights. I don't want to be misunderstood, but we're talking about children of Haitians that were hired by the Dominican state to work. And these children were born in the DR, and by the Constitution until 2010, they were recognized as Dominican people. So one more challenge that I want to share is that Dominicans that are not affected by this, that are not of Haitian descent, have them understand the problem that we have, the statelessness, and this lack of having these rights taken away. There's this racist feeling that is still there, it permeates, and the elite is using this quite well to create hatred, to divide. That's why in many occasions people are telling me, it's like, how can you say that there is racism, but there isn't racism? There is discrimination, but there isn't discrimination. The issue is this: the Haitian Dominican person who lives in the same reality, in the same social reality, we live together and we help each other, but there's an elite that it's not to their advantage to do this, and they're fostering hatred. Now, the last greatest challenge is not possible that for me to be recognized that I am a Dominican person, that I need to negate my Haitian roots, my ethnicities, my ancestors, my African roots. That is unforgivable, because any Dominican, no person of a Dominican person born in another state, here in the United States, in Puerto Rico, in Europe, it is demanded that for them to be citizen of that country, they need to negate their Dominican heritage. That's impossible. So historically, that has been messed with. You can be Dominican as long as you cannot validate the origin of your ancestors. And I will always say, to negate my grandpa that's Haitian, to negate my grandma, my great grandma that's from my mother, it's messed up, because without them, I would not be here. I'm not going to deny my heritage. I am here because of them. And as far as the Haitian folks, as far as tourism and sugarcane, they left their sweat, their work to maintain, to keep the economy going. So many years later, we need to be subjected to a modern day slavery without having access to our identifications that allows us to have the keys to freedom in order to access education, dignified work. That is one of the many of the challenges that up to this day we have, and that permeates the statelessness.
Thank you so much for that, Rosa Iris. And from the standpoint of production, Michèle, were there some, I assume there were challenges, because I've noticed there you had to shoot when Juan Teofilo was going into to see officials. How was it, that interaction dealing with officials? Because I noticed that it was a hidden camera, or am I wrong?
Yes, no, well, I wouldn't say those were challenges. I would say that we intentionally chose to use the hidden cameras throughout the film in these different circumstances in order to get the real sort of reaction. Because, you know, as a filmmaker and anyone who's been in front or behind the camera at any given time, well, we even can think about it even in our TikTok world and our Instagram world, when the camera's on, we perform, right? When the camera's on, we act differently. And so the idea, the intentional choice from the very beginning was to access those spaces, the administrative spaces, the bureaucracies, and the more dangerous spaces near the border and the checkpoints after the border with the patrol agents, to access that with hidden cameras, so we could understand what the stakes were and the dangers and the level of neglect and that existed, and the level of discriminatory treatment. And so, you know, the danger for me was minimal. It was really, you know, thanks to the brave actions of Rosa Iris, who carried multiple hidden cameras, as well as Juan Teofilo, you know, in his exchange with the bureaucrat officer who was exuding his own sense of power over Juan Teofilo. But also I want to shout out to the field producers who were present, Dominicans who were present specifically during the checkpoint, but also in the first scene in the film that you see, the first observational scene in the administrative office with the woman who denies access to school for the young man. They also were wearing hidden cameras and accompanied Rosa Iris and other people on the team. And they did it willingly. They're not of Haitian descent, but really form a part of the community in the DR that I think it's very important to recognize, because it's a complicated place. Not everybody is like Gladys, right? And not everybody is also Dominican of Haitian descent. There is a strong, you know, I think vibrant community of young people who are working to change things in whichever way they can. And part of it is also in film and production. There are other stories that sort of challenge the dominant narrative that we're getting from the elite and those in power.
Okay, that's great. It's always good to have allies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking on about Rosa Iris, this is for you. Going back to the 2016 campaign that you ran, there's this thing that really stood out to me when you were engaging in conversation with those young people and really trying to make them understand that, like you said, their vote is not worth 100 pesos. How do you think we can truly empower people to understand that they have the power to change things like you've been encouraging people to do?
Es un reto.
It's
Ante
a
una
challenge going against a culture, a certain politics in Dominican Republic. Every time that there are elections, the same slogan is repeated. Politicians, they come here just to ask for your vote. Then afterwards, they forget about that community. They forget about the issues that that community has. They forget about those who gave them the power to represent them and solve their issues. So it was like, this is the only opportunity that I have in order to achieve something. And we have been during months trying to make the young people understand that we need to teach politicians something. We need to teach them a lesson. We cannot keep repeating the same model, the same old model that was not working, because we are becoming part of the corruption if we do. So the challenge was to build that society that we need, an empowered society. Even like a math example. Okay, you're going to get 100 pesos, but that's not even enough for one day worth of food. You are going to be stuck with someone who's representing you for 4 years because of these 100 pesos. You will not be able to achieve the changes that you want. Now, this process helped me to reaffirm that we need to work very vigorously with young people. Maybe elders, adults, they have a harder time changing and getting accustomed to changes, but the young people are the ones that are going to be continuing the work. Those people who now are young people, and then they later will be able to become adults. So this is a process that every single one of us needs to take on from what we do. I cannot allow for them to play with my dignity because of 2 pesos. Now, we need to change the way of thinking on an individual basis. When I think of the 100 pesos, the 500 pesos I will get, it's individualism. It's not allowing me to see the collective problem that I'm building on my own. I think that that's where we can push, where we can see the issue as a common problem, that we need to look for a common solution.
Okay. And it sounds like, thank you for that. And it sounds like it's through grassroots organization, because we cannot wait for, no matter where we are, really, we can't wait for the government to do everything, right? It has to start with, like you said, each one of us. Right. Okay, so let's see, we have, okay. So in making this movie, and Michèle, I know you've done some work before, one of them being the acclaimed American Promise. And we'll put Michèle's website so you can visit the website and see all of the work that Rada Studios has done. But for this particular film, did you worry at all about having an audience for it, even though you've built the following through the years?
No.
That's straightforward. Yes, I like that.
You know, I don't go, you know, I've had these conversations before. You don't go in making a film thinking, well, of course you think about the audience, but you are your first audience, right? Okay. I am my first audience. I'm not making film to make money. Otherwise, I would have taken another trajectory, right? Okay. I want to make sure that that communities can relate to the stories, but I am my community in some ways. Mm-hmm. And if I don't feel nourished by what I see out there as a filmmaker, then I feel that there's always a space to tell the stories that I think are relevant. That because if I exist as an audience and I feel interested in what I am doing, there are others like me, right? And there are others like me who feel the thirst and the need for not just this kind of representation, but telling these complicated stories in a way that, you know, is engaging, right? As well. And so Did I think about audience? I mean, to a certain extent, but first I wanted to make sure that it felt good to me. And then knowing that with that, it would make sense to others. I think, but there's one thing to understand is, it's one thing to know that there's a community and that there's an audience out there, but it's another thing that requires money, funding, energy, labor to reach the audience that you know is there, right? And in this case, with these kinds of films and films that deal with underrepresented communities, attention has not always been paid to accessing those communities with relevant stories that can sometimes mobilize people, right? So they can sometimes be unconsciously threatening, to others as well. So it's important to think about strategy on what is it, how will these films roll out? How can I get support to roll it out and keep the momentum going? What can we do to build community around the film so it can have its own energy, right, through it? It's one of the reasons why we intentionally work with organizations like POV, because we know that there is attention paid to the audience that we know is out there, and sort of funds that are channeled in that way to nourish that and support it. And we see the fruits of that in that this film continues to screen on a regular basis. And it basically came out in 2020, in June of 2020, and we had the broadcast a few months ago in July of this year. But we continue, so the momentum builds, because we've sort of we don't have the funding that we could have to get it really out there in a bigger way, but we have the community, and there's been sort of a ground foundation that's been built through the collaboration with POV and with others, with Rosa Iris and her work in Pittsburgh and other places, and other people who are supporters of the cause, like In Cultured Company and other organizations that keep the conversation going. But you have to find those fellow warriors in this battle.
Okay, great. Well, we're happy that it keeps, because this is definitely something that this is a story that needs to be told, because I've personally learned quite a lot. And, people are always wondering, well, it's one island, Española, and then where does the divide come from? And speaking about that, there's some information in the chat as far as the historical facts behind what is happening right now. So please take advantage of that. You can always save the chat. Going back to you,
just
Rosa.
one thing I want to say, though,
Yes.
What we hope also with the story is this understanding, because I have a number of connections to the story, myself being of Haitian ancestry, born in Haiti, of Haitian roots. My migration story, while it's not to the DR, but it's to North America, as Black immigrants with our family here, the kind of experiences that our families have had, there is a direct connection. And it's really important, I think, for us to look at the DR within a larger global context of white supremacy, racial caste system, racial capitalism, and how it's feeding these migratory patterns that are existing. There is a reason why, Haitian migrants are at the border of Mexico, right? There is a reason why, it is the lowest labor, as Rosa spoke to the question of modern day slavery in the DR, and it's specifically being, filled by Haitians and their descendants. There is a historical connection to that. And, the Gladyses also exist here in the United States.
Yes.
And we need to be able to make those connections to understand that we are connected to the work that Rosa Iris is doing, and we have to do that work here too.
Yes, definitely, because we've heard that, what they were saying about people of Asian descent, we've heard that here too about Mexicans and other people, you know, we've heard that. And the nationalist movement, it's spreading across the world, unfortunately. So thank you for pointing that out, that it's not just the DR and Haiti, but it's the whole world really that we need to watch out for. Okay, so going back to, I know that we're a bit over time, but we're having such an interesting conversation that we'll just keep going. So thanks for staying on. If you have to go, by all means, do so. But I wanted to go back to Rosa Iris. You said something in the film that really struck me. Speaking of people from the Dominican Republic, that even though most of them have African ancestry, they deny that ancestry. What do you think that is?
Bueno, tenemos un elemento histórico bien fuerte.
Okay, so we have a really strong historical element. It's a country that's mainly Black that does not recognize their Blackness. Nonetheless, how you were writing in the chat, we have a history that begins when Columbus came, and then 50 years later, those people who lived in the island, the indigenous people, they were extinguished, they died, they were murdered. They bring African people, and that's where we are. As a result of African people, Spanish people, and other heritages. Nonetheless, the most recent fact that we want to highlight is the DR strengthened that discourse that we were independent from Haiti, and from there lies resentment, hatred, that it's seen very clearly reflected in the matanza from 37, the murder of 37, where the dictator Trujillo sends to murder millions of people, just using that as a reference, their origin, based on your skin color. It's also called the Matanza de Perejil, the parsley murder, because in order for them to identify whether the person was Haitian or Dominican, they would make them say in Spanish, parsley, perejil. So there's a posture that we need to assume that I'm a Dominican person based on my skin color or the texture of my hair. So many times it creates great impotence to say, hey, check it out, Haitian, as if it's an insult.
Right.
It's a historical problem, beginning with what we have seen, but also it's a cultural issue. It's an issue of structural racism and discrimination, because this keeps being perpetrated in the state in a subconscious ways, and many other ways in a very conscious way. Maybe sometimes when you try to correct an action, an expression that's racist, it's discriminatory, the person is like, I'm not racist. Or let's say when a Dominican that is not of Haitian descent, let's say that we're having a conversation, we're having a debate, they accuse you of being anti-Dominican, to being a traitor of your country. When we talk about race, when we are talking about respecting human rights, more than anything, when we're talking about language, skin color, they will tell you, I'm not racist, I'm defending my country, you are a bad Dominican. Now, this is an issue. This is a very bad issue. Now, I want to highlight another example. There was an instance where the people who do the defending, the activists, we were tired of threats, insults in the middle of protests. They would be like traitors to the country. Congress people, they would come and say that those people who insult the activists, they're good Dominicans because they're defending the Dominican Republic. Now, the hate speech, a congressman to applaud those actions, that is dangerous. That shows the level of what is going on with discrimination, with not being able to accept their Blackness. Now, when you look at the physical traits of those people who negate their origins, you're like, that's impossible to think that someone who's a Black person would deny their own origins. their own roots, their own, the way that they look.
Well, thank you for that. What is your perspective on that, Michèle?
Sorry about that. I couldn't find the mute button. Yeah, I mean, everything that Rosa said, I think if we look at, somebody mentioned that it is an issue around the Americas, and absolutely, again, I don't want us to it's easy to sort of look at the DR and sort of like cast it as, this extreme example of, anti-Black racism and discrimination, and internalized oppression of Black people between Black people, but it is a symptom that exists throughout the Americas, and it's I see it this way, if we look at white supremacy across the Americas, or we look at the United States, you have this one drop rule. It's the one drop rule that says, one drop of Black blood and you're Black. Not that there isn't colorism, we know that it exists here as well, but in terms of oppression, interaction, systemic injustice, there's this kind of bright line. In the Americas, it's the opposite. It's the one drop of white blood you have, you're better than. Right? And so you have all these gradations of color within even families and people, the way people are treated. We have these terminology, mejorar la raza, that exists. That's not just in the DR. You hear it all over the Americas. And yet we know that slavery has existed at every corner of this hemisphere, right? And in some ways, it all started on Hispaniola, where the first Europeans arrived, the first enslaved Africans arrived, the first genocide against indigenous peoples happened on the island of Hispaniola. But it's also the place where the racial caste system first started. The Haitian Revolution was foundational around the push against anti-Black racism. It was critical race theory before there was ever critical race theory now. When you think about the discourse that was happening in Haiti in the early 1800s, so much before its time, and it's paying for it up till now, right? There is a reason why Haiti has been treated the way it's been treated. It's because it is this eyesore to white supremacy. It is this physical, embodied, philosophical, spiritual challenge to it. And for it to thrive is too much for white supremacy to take. And we owe a debt actually to Haiti, all of the Americas. I'm not going to get into that. Sorry. I won't get into the history of how Haiti helped all of the independence movements across this hemisphere and then was slapped in the face because of its Blackness. Right. And so we cannot shy away from it. We need to lean into it, whether it's around from Stateless to the discussions around what was that film that In the Heights, to these other conversations. It's so important for us to unpack the way white supremacy, rears its ugly head and its toxicity within our own selves. And it's very deep in Latin America.
Yes. And thank you for that. And going from, like you said, going from the DR and Haiti to the global world, I don't know if many of you know, but we're actually 2 years into the 2 last years of the International Decade for People of African Descent. Mm-hmm. And so my question to you both is, how do we, as people of African descent, whether we're from Latin America, North America, Africa, because in Africa also the colonialism, we still have, it's still lingering, it's still there, we still feel the impact. How do we form a coalition of sorts to truly fight, truly stand up as one? What are your thoughts on that? Or is it possible? Rosa, Iris, you want to take that one first?
¿Cómo te explico?
How can I explain this? You go first, Michèle.
¿Puedes repetirme la última parte de la pregunta?
Would you
también?
mind
Okay.
explaining me the question again?
Yes, sure. So I was saying that, how do we, as people of African descent, no matter where we are in the world, how do we form a coalition to work together so that we can fight against white supremacists? Because basically that's what it is about.
Yo creo que lo primero es
First
entender
is understanding the importance of being unified. A few moments ago, I was saying that we were sold an idea of individualism. In other words, I need to first take care of my stuff. That individuality creates strength to that white supremacy to murder all of us, right, on our own. Now, in DR, I would say if we do not fight together, we will get murdered on our own. So we have so many things in common. Afro descendants in all of the Americas, we have so many things in common. So let's look for those points of commonality. Let's get together so that we can see how will we work these things out, how will we strengthen each other. Historically, Black people, we have had to fight the different conquests that Afro people we have, that it's always been fought for. I think that that's where we need to begin or continue doing. We need to continue being unified. Look for our points in common.
Thank you, Rosa Iris. Michèle, what are your thoughts?
I sometimes it's too daunting to think of these things in big chunks. So it's really, sometimes it's just about, looking at what can we do on the daily basis with the people that we encounter and work with. I mean, I'm thinking I have a lot of gratitude for the fact that this film, is actually showing in Mexico. It's shown multiple times in the Black Colombian and Afro-Colombian festivals. It's showing in an Afro-Brazilian festival later this year. And it sort of continues to spark sort of conversations of solidarity. I think for me, one of the most transformative screenings I've experienced was a screening we had of Stateless with the women of the Pacific, the Black women of the Pacific of Colombia in Cali. They did a festival screening there, and Rosa was there, and the conversations were really transformative. And it was about building solidarity. The film was almost an excuse, right, for conversation of saying, I am not alone. The struggle is not just this. I see myself in you, Rosa. Rosa, you are my sister. We are inspired by what you are doing, and it gives us strength to continue doing the work that's very local, but has global impact, right? And so sometimes it's just about being able to feed the possibility of just continuing to wake up the next day and do the battle that needs to be done, because it is a long-term battle that we're facing on a daily basis. I try to do it through my films. You're doing it through the House of Jelly, Flavia's doing it through her translations and making it accessible. I think if we're able to find purpose in what we're doing, and Rosa Iris continues to do work with migrant workers in Pennsylvania, as well as keeping connections with the DR that brings a whole other, so it's like this ripple effect. Mm-hmm. And so it's good to have the big picture kind of ideas of works of solidarity, but sometimes the solidarity happens just on a one-on-one basis too. And I don't want to lose sight of the importance of that, because sometimes that's all we can do, but it is important too.
Okay, thank you for that. And Diana perhaps have a question about how we can begin to make directories of organizations that are doing liberation work in the Americas. That will be interesting. But I mean, Francia Marquez in Colombia, yes. And off the top of my head, I know of one. It works here in the DC area for immigrant families. It's Casa, but there are so many. There are so many. I feel like for me personally, social media has been a great place to find different organizations, people who are doing this work. So I personally do not have a clear-cut answer. I don't know if either of you do, but perhaps that's something to think about and see how we can. Yes,
Yeah,
Michèle.
the one thing I do want to talk about is the idea of continuing in a tradition of Pan-Africanism that has existed, right? Even during the time of, Senghor and Césaire and these other folks who came together in places like Paris to sort of have these conversations that continued through the 60s and the Black Power movement and connections, with Africa and other parts of the Black Power movement in the Americas as well. Is what does that look like today, And I'm not sure, maybe I'm too old to kind of have my foot on the ground in terms of seeing that, but from what I've seen, social media has sort of this double-edged sword. In one way, we're very connected, but in another way, we're also very divided in terms of, this idea of potentially coming together, but there is the potential of being on these platforms to have these conversations and continuing these traditions.
Yes, definitely. So my last question, and I believe we've addressed all of the ones that are in the chat. As far as, so we now know Rosa Iris is in Pennsylvania, and how we can support stateless people from India, from the US. So Michèle and Rosa Iris shared some information about that. So I'm just going to move into our very last question. Throughout the film, there's this very almost poetic thing happening with the story of Moraime. So from the standpoint of the director and the storytelling, why was it important for you to weave it in, Michèle?
Well, it was an attempt for me to address the historical without being too didactic, and kind of using the tools of magical realism that, I've grown up with, that, are part of our cultural fabric, and using the legend as not just a lesson, yes, a lesson, a historical lesson, as we do in our oral traditions. Through storytelling, we learn about our past, we learn about our ancestors, we learn about tragedies and about triumphs. And so for me, the story of Moraime represents that. And in some ways, Moraime is sort of this, this sort of ghost, this sort of modern day ghost maroon who, sought liberation in Haiti, faced this tragedy. And she's a composite of all of the people who died as a result of this massacre in 1937. And in some ways, it's a way of commemorating that event that still, is not really officially recognized by either government. There are many unmarked graves, and it's a way of paying homage to that, but to understanding that the work of Rosa Iris and of other folks, Dominicans of Haitian descent, doing the work, stands on the shoulders of these souls, of these ghosts like Moraime. And it's a way of paying homage to them. So it was kind of, it was a way for me artistically to push myself in terms of building this sort of narrative within the larger framework, but with a very sort of clear intention of exposing people to the history.
Thank you very much. So any final thoughts, something that you want to share and leave us with, Rosa Iris?
Oh, sí.
Yes. Honestly, it surprised me so much when Michèle decided to choose Moraime's story. I didn't know that story. And to be able to connect it in the film, to weave it, it was quite interesting. More than anything, to continue working with Dominican youth, the massacre of 1937, because it was one of the largest genocides. But even up to this date, young people don't know what happened. And there are no reparations. Up to this date, there have been no reparations to what happened in the massacre.
So you're giving us homework, so we have to go and study about the history, and so that we can be better educated about this. Thank you. Michèle, any parting words?
I just want to thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much to the three of you, Flavia doing the back and forth, and Rosa Iris, of course. We wish you all the very best. And Michèle, what can we say? Thank you. We wouldn't be here if not for your project. So thank you for the work that you do. And for everyone else, so please, there's very important information in the chat, including how you can support the work. So please click when you, at the bottom on the right, there's a chat box. Then there's the three dots at the far right. That's how you can save the chat, because you don't want to miss all the information that was shared. If not, I can always email it to you because it's saved on my desktop. And we are having another screening. 2 weeks from today, because they happen every other Saturday. So please visit our website. And yes, I wish you all the best. Please take care of yourselves and have a great evening or night wherever you are. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye. Thanks. Good to see you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.